Okay, welcome back. This time we're going to be using this book. Of course, you don't have to have the book. You could just have the online version of it. So now we're going to learn about actually what to type and all the 10 gazillion commands that are involved in making Linux and Unix work. All right, first order of business is, of course, to double click on the icon and get the thing going. I'm going to hit the run command. And nothing's happening. Oh, because I didn't have it. I wasn't clicked on anything. Okay, there we go. All right, so we're launching up, the Ubuntu server just like we did the last time. So the command line actually has a name. That sounds a little strange. But in the old days, the thing was just called the shell back in the Unix days. And so, the shell. We still call it the shell. But there's lots of choices. There's like 5 or 6 different shells. Each one has a slightly different flavor to it. And then not necessarily what the commands are. The commands are almost always going to be the same. It's like, how do you do command history and how do you do editing and maybe the shell even has some programming features where you can have if statements and, it's an entire programming environment. Okay. As usual, I'm going to hit the button so I can actually type. All right, I'm going to log in. 2020. Okie dokie. So now I'm up and running. So this thing that we're looking at, this is the shell. And so obviously it's designed to take, keyboard input, right, from you, the human, right, makes sense. And this box, in addition to being called the shell, sometimes it's called the terminal emulator, okay? Because when you get to the GUI version, which will be quite some time for us, but we're going to install the workstation version, which has the GUI. And then if you want to go to the command line, you click on this thing called term. Okay. We don't have to click on something called term because we're already there. But look what happens if I exit the session. Okay. By just hitting exit. Well, it logs me out. Now, if this was the GUI version, when you exited, the screen would disappear. But since we're not running the GUI version, we're here, so let me log in one more time. CIS4335. Okie dokie. So we're all back and running. Cool beans. So this is essentially the opposite of what a graphical user interface, a GUI, would be. So for example, there's no mouse. I do have to click on the VirtualBox thing to give it focus so it knows about, the keyboard's coming from this and that and the other. But after that, actually inside Ubuntu, there's no mouse cursor. If you want to move the mouse around, you're going to be doing it with with arrow keys. So there's no movable cursor necessarily. And a lot of things you might get familiar with is like copy and paste. You know how in the Windows world you would do you'd light up some text and say Control-C for copy, and then you go to some other document and you do Control-V for paste. None of that works here. All those things are constructs of higher order than what just the shell is. Okay. Now it's true that individual applications can have a copy and paste capability. We're going to later on, very very late, we're going to start using this editor called VI. And it has copy and paste, but it doesn't use Control-C and Control-V. It uses its own commands. Okay. So just a little bit of historical significance here, perspective. That, typing at the command line is not fun. And so I kind of mentioned that this is actually not a very good interface for doing stuff. And so 2- and 3-letter abbreviations for getting stuff done is fairly often. So for example, the list command isn't LIST, it's LS. Now, I only have one thing in my folder, and it's temp. Temp is in dark blue, which, by the way, sometimes is hard to see because the blue isn't very bright. Blue is an indicator that this is a folder. Now, if I look inside the folder, I see nothing. And you go, wait a minute, I remember from last time when you looked inside the folder, it contained all this information from, your host machine. What the heck's going on? Well, we haven't got to the point yet where we told the machine to automatically mount folders. And so if I want that to happen again, I'm going to have to type in that magic command. The sudo mount -t, vbox sf temp. Okay, that guy, if you type that in, then it'll go back to doing what it was doing. Okay, cool. Let's continue. So one of the things you can do is use the up arrow on the keyboard to kind of go back and see all the commands that you've typed. Now, isn't this kind of cool? This even shows you things from the last time you logged in. By the way, that's configurable. So that's the command you would have to do. And I did that days ago, right? So up arrow and down arrow gets me to up, and I can see the history of all the commands. Isn't that pretty cool? To include ones that are happened the time before. I kind of like that. Obviously, when you go up arrow, let's find a long one like this one. I can use it left and right, to scoot over what I want to do, right? And then I could hit the backspace key, and to put something back in, like in this case, vbox sf. Hey, I'm gonna go ahead and do this for no particular reason. CIS4335 2020. Okay, so I'm gonna do that ls temp one more time, and ta-da, it looks completely different than it did before, right? Cool. All right. So up arrow gives me the history, and then I have the right and left arrow to be able to go in there, make changes and edit things. Kind of makes sense. On page 4, they talk about some very simple commands. Now, these commands are ones that are just commands by themselves. They don't take any arguments. So I'll describe what that means in just a minute. So the first one is the date command. I didn't mean to hit the caps lock key. Okay, just a minute. There, and it just spits out today's date. Cool. Another one is calendar, so it's CAL, and it spits out a cool little calendar. Those are kind of simple. The next one is DF. Let's see what that does. Well, DF is going to show me all of the... DF essentially was designed to be disk-free, but of course they had to abbreviate it. So DF gives me all of the places where things are located on my machine, how big it is, how much is available in %. So I have whatever that number is, 1.5 on dev and blah, 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 all these things. Okay, so the DF command shows me, we'll go into a little bit more detail about what all this stuff means, but the DF basically means how much disk space are you using. There's another one called free, which is kind of sort of similar, except it just kind of cuts it down and says, here's how much memory we're using right now. Instead of having disk, DF is disks, and free is the amount of memory. And it talks about the total amount of memory on your machine, how much is being used, how much is free, and then how much swap space there is. And we'll describe the intricacies of what swap is at some other time. Okay, so one of the weird things about Ubuntu is because it's a command line thing, you could, for example, get multiple terminal sessions simultaneously. You could kind of go, like, if I wanted to do, I'm in the middle of doing something, I got to go, oh man, I need to copy that file, doggone it. Instead of, you could just pop up another terminal, log in a second time, do the copying, and then switch back. And so the way you do that is do a thing called Control-Alt, and then the function key 1. So I'm going to do Control-Alt, function key 1. That's 1 is the current one. Control-Alt, function key 2 brings me up to another login prompt. it's kind of subtle, but right here it says TTY2, and the other one said TTY1, kind of giving you the names of these things. So I'm going to go ahead and log in a second time. Okay, so I'll admit I'm going to go ahead and close this guy out, and brings me back to, oh, well, actually, I don't need that one. So I can switch between the guys. So let's just do Control Alt F1, and boom, I'm back to the other guy. Kind of cool. And this allows you to kind of just stop what you're doing and go do something else and come back. Yeah, I like it. It's kind of cool. So essentially, you have 1 through 6 is these what they call virtual terminals. Remember, this thing's called a terminal. Whatever, right? Okay. So that's essentially all you kind of sort of need to know about the basics of typing commands. We haven't learned anything useful because that starts in Chapter 2, which we're going to do right now. Okay, navigating the system is probably one of the most important things you need to learn how to do. And let me tell you, it is not as easy as you might think. So Linux uses a hierarchical structure just like Windows does. The only difference in Windows is Windows has multiple structures. They have a tree, for example, for the C drive, another one for the D drive, another one for the E drive. You know, the drive letters are the top of each one of these trees. But in our world, we only have one tree. And the reason why is when we mount, remember we just did mount a while ago, we mounted to a location in the tree. So let's just pretend, instead of all this green stuff up front where we did the mount onto the temp folder, let's say that was actually a CD-ROM. I would mount the CD-ROM into the temp directory. And so therefore that content now appears in temp. So there are no drive letters. Instead we mount to a point in the file system. Okay, by the way, the more appropriate term is directory rather than folder. Folder is kind of a Windows term. Now, quite frankly, I don't really care which one you use, and I'll probably get it wrong half the time. Half the time I'll probably say folder, and half the time I'll say, a directory. But if you want to impress somebody in an interview, it kind of makes sense to learn the correct language. The most correct in the Linux world is going to be a directory. Okay, so everything is connected. So I'm going to show a goofy little PowerPoint presentation here. Okay, so essentially this is, this is one way of looking at the hierarchical structure. At the top is a single root. And let's say, for example, I had some files in there called index and layout. And underneath there, I could have other levels. So I could have an image folder or a fruit folder. And under fruit folder, I could have another folder called kumquat. And under kumquat, it could have storage and it could have recipe. All right, here's the key to this all. This type of tree, when I'm moving down, when I'm at root, I have two ways to go down, okay? One is to go to images and one is to go to fruit. Make sense? Okay, when I get to fruit and I want to go down, even though there's one choice, the machine doesn't really know that there's one choice. So I'm going to have to tell it specifically which path to take. I'm going to take the kumquat path. Now, so going down, I have to specify which path I'm taking. Make sense? But going up is always up. Okay? There's never any choice. When I get to kumquat, up is always fruit. When I get to fruit, up is always root. And never anything else. So we can take a tiny bit of a shortcut. Rather than giving the name of the parent, we could just give an abbreviation that means the same thing as the parent. Since there's only one parent. Make sense? Okay. We're coming up on the 15-minute mark, so we'll pause this and continue in just a few.